Hello, I'm Alex Siebold, and I'm going to teach you guys a little bit about 2D animation. So this is just going to be the basics, and it's using a free application that you can download from online called Pencil2D. So Pencil2D is basically just free online, look it up, Google it, and you should be able to download it with no problem. I'm currently on a Mac interface, so if you guys are using PC, it might look a little bit different. So let's just jump in and start with Pencil2D and what it looks like. So this is what you're going to get when you first start. And we're going to look at the tools real quick. So this is the pencil tool. It's usually what I use, but you can also use some of the other painting tools if you guys have ever used a online desktop painting. You know about the paint bucket, fills in everything with whatever color you want. Some other things I would say, there is this tool here which allows you to box out anything that you have drawn, which is not working for me, but there we go. So I'm going to box that out, and I can move it around as well, my screen. And then I'm going to zoom out, which depending on what you're using, I'm just using both of my fingers on my keypad to zoom in and out. There are also some buttons here that allow you to zoom in and out as well. But this is going to be the white box you see is going to be what you're drawing on. So now I've selected what I just drew, and using this tool here, I can move my selection around. So that's going to be super useful if you're starting to move things around for your animation. So some other basics here. We also have our layers in the bottom left corner. So the bitmap layer is usually what I stick with because vector layers are a little bit confusing, but if you know a lot about vector layers, you can use that as well. It just depends on the quality and how easy it is for the computer itself to render your animation. So I'm going to take my camera layer as soon as this is finished. You can take your camera layer and press the minus here in the bottom left and get rid of that. Any other layers you want to get rid of. And then obviously adding the plus will give you a new layer. Like I said, I usually use bitmap. And this is going to give you the basics of how to use the Pencil2D app. The colors are over here. You can choose that. Some other things that are similar to any painting online desktop versions that you might have used, your brush size on the left, you can change that as well. So I can go from having a really big brush, which is not working because I have the wrong color selected, but you can use a really big brush as well as a really small brush, and you can see how change in the screen, the circle changes with when you make it bigger or smaller. And then on the right side, we have our color schemes. They are very basic painting tools that you would see in any desktop version of something. And you can choose along here, decide that. My image is in the way. But this is the color box, very simple. Choose whatever color you want, and then you can draw with that color. Okay, so since we've got that going, once again, our zoom is down here for our actual keyframes. So each frame of an animation is going to move your animation along. So in order to make a new frame, you press plus. So right now I'm on the camera layer. I should not be on that. I should be on the bitmap layer. But to add a new animation frame, so each frame is going to have your drawing, you're going to add this plus here. And then the minus will get rid of a frame if you don't want it, and it will delete that frame. So that's going to be the basics of how to use Pencil2D. And then in a second, I'm going to show you how to actually look at the basics of animation itself, and we're just going to use Pencil2D as a tool. So now we're looking at a ball bounce animation. So this is just going to give you, once again, the basics of making animations with Pencil2D. So first things I want to point out, I got rid of my vector layer, just looking at my bitmap layer. Doesn't really matter, just make sure that you're on your bitmap layer when you start drawing. So I just drew that with my pencil real quick, and I made another frame, which you can see by this box down at the bottom left. If I go to frame 2, you can see that this is kind of shaded. So that's going to be what we call onion skinning. It's very important with animation. Back in the olden days, before computer programming, they actually had to do it with transparent paper. But we're doing it with a computer program. So this onion skinning is going to let you see what your previous slide looked like, your previous frame, so that I can base it off when I draw again. So if you don't have it already on when you start, it's going to be up here in the top, and it's going to be under view. I went to onion skinning and I did previous. So that's going to be the most efficient way to onion skin, would be using the previous option. So onion skinning is super important when you're starting to begin animation. So I have my circle here. This is the previous frame. That's why it's shaded differently because of onion skinning. And I'm going to start my ball bounce and have a pretend floor at the bottom. And I'm going to do something called stretching. So stretching is where there's something happening that's very fast. And usually in animation, maybe they use speed lines, like you've seen some animations run and they have speed lines behind them. But there's also stretching to show that something is going very fast in a direction. So right now I have begun to stretch my ball. And I'm going to add another frame, which might take a second for loading reasons. And then once that frame is loaded, I'm going to look at the onion skin from the previous frame. All right, so I put some new frames in, just pressing that plus whenever it decides to actually work. And now I'm going to go to frame 3. So to do that, sometimes I accidentally click a frame. That's not what you want to do. You want to actually get the top of it so that it says 3. So I'm clicking at the top of this frame selection. So now I'm on the 3rd frame. Once again, onion skinning. You can see that my previous frame, frame 2, is a bit darker than frame 1. So that's just showing you the progression of your frames. So I'm going to stretch a little bit more. Oh, and by the way, Control Z is your best friend, or Command Z if you're using a Mac. That's going to immediately, if I make a mistake, I Control Z it, it's gone. Okay, so we're going to bring our ball up a little bit more. It's still stretched because it's going pretty fast. And yes, I understand my ball is spontaneously bouncing with no reason, but listen, this is animation, it's not real life. Okay, so once again, still have our onion framing or onion skinning going on with our frames, but I'm going to bring my ball up more. So previously I did show you that you could select your animation and actually move it. So if you want to do that instead, you can do that. And I'm going to add a frame and we're going to have it go up a little bit more. Now we're not really looking like a ball, but I swear in a few seconds, once we actually start the animation, you'll see that this is a ball. So our ball is going back to its normal shape because we're kind of at the peak of our bounce. So we're slowing down before we fall down again. So we have our frame here. I'm going to take it. We're stretching again because, oh man, it's falling so fast. Am I right? And it's misshapen. I know. I'm using a mouse and a keypad. So like, ooh, if I had one of those fancy tablets, it would be much better. I'm making excuses. Okay, so I'm kind of lost as to where my ground was. So I'm going to go back to the number 1 just to check it. And I see that's right here. So I'm going to make my ball. But here's the interesting part. So we have, oh, yes, I guess I'll save. It's going to ask me where I want to save, isn't it? Yep, cool. Anyways, so now that we have our ball hitting the ground, normally when balls hit grounds, usually nothing really happens. But in animation and cartoony animation especially, they squash. So it's like if you took a pumpkin and you threw it at the ground, it's going to squash. So I'm going to show you some squashing. So this is going to be something like this. We're getting a lot fatter. And that's because we're pretending like this impact with the ground was super hard and then it's going to spring back up. So, oh, lovely. Pencil2D is something, guys. So I'm going to give it another one of these, maybe even flatter. This is just really exaggerating the motion of the ball bounce. Okay, and then I'm going to bring it back to normal ball size very slowly. All right, let's see what this looks like. It might be a little bit small, but I think that'll do. Not quite sure why my frames, okay. Yeah, sometimes Pencil2D takes a while to load. Okay, so very simple. If I wanted this button on the bottom that kind of looks like a, well, it says a loop, it's going to have it go over and over again. So that's the beauty of ball bounce. You can have it just start over and over again, and it's going to show you the same thing. So let's see. I don't know why it's not looping like I said it to, but that's all right. Usually it works. And then if you want to turn onion skinning off so that you can see it better, that works too. But you can see at the top, we're going up, we're kind of calming down for a second, and then we're squashing with the ball bounce. So that's basic ball bounce, just giving you the basics. It's rough, but we're going to get into the more interesting stuff in a second. All right, so now we're going to look at arcs and proportions. So even if you're not doing stick figures and you say that I want to do an actual real human, or I want to do my cartoon character that doesn't look human, anything like that, you still want to keep your proportions the same. So I'm going to show you a good example and a bad example. So using arcs, which is right here in red, it's basically just making a half circle around one of the limbs of movement. So I know that my guy is going to wave his hand up and down. So that's going to be shown by this arc, and we're just going to follow that arc. And the arc itself, you can put on a different layer so that you can delete it afterwards without having to do any weird erasing. But it's really just a mark of where I should be when I'm drawing my different limbs. So let's look at this. So I'm on frame 1, look at the bad side versus the good side. So if we notice that as I press play, you can see that the left side, the bad side, my forearm of my man is kind of getting smaller and then getting bigger. So that's kind of what happens if you don't pay attention to your proportions. But with my arc, it's not perfect because, listen, we've already gone over reasons why it's not perfect. But on the good side, we do see that our arc is keeping it relatively around the same size for our forearm, where on the other side, it's really hard to keep track if you're not using arcs. So the reason that I have background on here is because I used a different layer for my arc. So once again, man, Pencil2D really is something, guys. This plus over by our layers allows you to add a new layer, and that's what this arc layer is. So I believe that you can hide the layer by clicking the circle next to the layer. So right now it's black, showing that it's there, it's shown up. But if I want to hide the layer without actually erasing it, I can just click it, and now you can't see my arc. So that's going to be a sort of background layer that you can add on top. And once again, you can also take your layers and shift them down just by clicking and holding and then shifting it down below another one. And of course, they'll make the layer go under a different layer. But we'll go into that a little bit more later. So this is arcs and proportions. This is just basics to getting a character, whether it's real, cartoon, or it's a human, not a human. You always want your limbs to stay the same size throughout the animation, or it's going to look a little bad. So we'll look into some more of the background stuff later. Okay, so now we're going to talk about walking. So that's something very basic, whether you are making a humanoid character or not, is your walk cycle. So usually that has 4 basic frames to your walk cycle. And just to explain it a little bit, you can start with your skeleton, which is usually a stick figure. Mine is a little bit different, but whatever you want your skeleton to look like, you want to start there, and then you can add on top a layer that shows what the actual character is. Because we want to figure out how it's moving first before we actually figure out some of the details of the character. So right now we're looking at our skeleton. It's just sticking, looking in one direction. You can kind of see the side of it. And if I go to my second frame, maybe, possibly. I think I have it paused for a second. Yeah. So first few frames, I just have him standing there so that you can understand, oh, he's going to start walking. And then he's preparing to walk. This way, I'm just having one leg in the back and one leg in the front. So that's a good way to start. And as you might want to check out yourself before you actually start animating walking, just pay a lot of attention of, all right, what's happening to my legs as I am walking? Because if you can imagine yourself walking while you're animating it, it's going to look way better. So I'm on frame 6. Now I'm going to 7. And we can see that right here, we're lifting up our leg. So the frame 1 is going to be 2 legs side by side, one in front, one in back. Our second frame is going to be the 2 legs crossing. So as you can see, my back leg is the one that's coming forward, and it's going to cross right here. So I've added some buffer in so it's a little bit more smooth, but really the basics are first slide, you have one leg in front, one in back. Second frame, you have the back leg crossing the front leg, and then we're going to see what happens after that. So now I have another frame of it bent, but now the back leg is in the front. And then our fourth frame is just going to be, oh, I'm back to my original one. And I literally took my first frame and put it here, and then you can just copy and paste, and then move your guy forward using that tool I showed you previously. So see, this is the exact same frame, if I click the right one, from the start. So if I look here, this is the tool that you're going to want to use to actually move. So you select, and then you use this tool to move your person forward if you don't want to redraw it. It's very simple. So let's take a peek at what this actually looks like. Yes, so we're kind of leisurely walking a few steps. I know it's not a lot, guys. I'm sorry. But let me show you what you can do when you actually put something on top. So this is going to be your skeleton. It's just a stick figure. But then I'm going to put my layer on top, and you can see I use the skeleton as a tool to actually draw my character. So if I take it away, it just looks like I drew my character. But with the skeleton, it gives me a framework of where my legs should be, where my arms should be, and it's super simple when you start walking. Once again, my onion skinning is on, so that's why you can see those weird just shading. And then I'm going to, looks like I already took off I'm going to turn off my onion skin. Once again, this is where you can find it. So that is my character. It looks like, oh, I'm a great drawer. I made him walk all by myself, but in reality, I had a skeleton here the whole time. And you can see it there, and I can take off my character. Just I would definitely say use a skeleton. Let's see what it looks like when I have my character. And I did some fun stuff. Sorry, guys. I like looping it, so that's what you get. All right, so that's the basics of the walk cycle. Once again, main takeaway, there's usually about 4 steps. One where you have the one leg, maybe left leg, in the back, right leg in the front. And then you are crossing the back leg, which will maybe be your left leg, with the front leg. And then you are going to have it bent a little bit, and the back leg is now becoming the front leg. And then you're back to square one, where you could literally take frame 1 and make it frame 4, and it looks exactly the same. Because unless you have a special character where the left and the right leg look differently, usually the characters, your legs look the same. So that's going to be our walking cycle. All right, so now we're going to talk about anticipation and follow through. So these are some basic things to show you more realistic movement when you're making your characters. So some very basic things having to do with anticipation is jumping. So I have here a poorly drawn frog that will show you that you have to bend your legs before you actually jump. It's pretty hard to not bend your legs and jump. You can try it, but realistically, you gotta bend your legs. But sometimes people forget that when they're animating, so their stick figure ends up just bouncing up and down without having bent their legs, which is not realistic. And even if you're making something cartoony, you do want to have it kind of connected to realism. So I have a frog here whose legs are bent, and that's going to show you animation-wise what anticipation looks like. So our other side of it is follow through, and that's what I have there is a hand with a football, and I'm sure you've heard of it before. When you throw a football, a good way to throw it is to point your hand forward when you actually end up throwing it. So you'll see that in my animation. I'll go slowly from slide to slide. So we see that our frog has bent its legs a little bit more before it's planning on jumping. And the hand has actually brought the ball back a little bit more before throwing it. And then we can see our beautifully drawn frog has decided to jump finally. And with the football, I told you guys before the speed lines. So instead of using speed lines, I just kind of dragged my parts of the hand and parts of the ball a little bit behind. So we're seeing that follow through our very well drawn frog. And then we can see we're jumping and we're throwing, and then we're back to square one. So it might look bad, which it is, but in reality, it's like as you bring it up to a certain number of frames per second, it looks pretty fine. And that's what those follow through and anticipation do to your actual end product, is making it more realistic and, you know, look good. So quickly, I just want to show you FPS. That's going to be in the bottom right. So right now I'm at 13 FPS. The FPS is pretty important for real life animators who are paid. But realistically for us, it's basically just going to show you how slow or fast your animation looks. So at 13 FPS, I thought we were pretty fast, so I might drop it down to 9 FPS, and we'll see that we're going way slower than before. So I'm going to start at the beginning, and we are going way slower. Once again, you can go faster if you want. The only big difference with changing the FPS when instead of just like looking at fast versus slow is that we are going to have a difference in smoothness. So obviously I only have so many frames, and if I have more frames per second, I have to draw way more, but it's going to look really, really smooth. So you just have to figure out that give and take of, I don't really want to have super high FPS because my animation I worked on for 2 hours is going to go by in 2 seconds when the person is watching it. But I also want it to be smooth. So you have to really think about that, play around with the FPS a little bit, and look into that sort of thing. Okay, so now we're going to look at secondary motion. So this is a kind of motion that is used to give a little subtlety or give something extra to your animation that makes it look more realistic. I specifically love Ghibli movies, so this would be like My Neighbor Totoro or Spirited Away. Those Ghibli movies are perfect when it comes to secondary animation. You don't even notice it, but if you watch it over and over again like I do, you're like, oh, this is so beautiful. They worked so hard on this. But I mean, realistically, it's as long as you understand, I think I need to add a little bit more to my animation, but I'm not quite sure what. If your character has hair, if your character has clothes that are loose, all these things can have secondary motion that change with your character as your character moves, or if your character is standing still and there's a wind or something like that. So secondary motion might be, an example would be, well, if I'm standing in the wind and my hair is moving but I'm standing still. That's secondary motion because realistically we're focusing on the person, but the hair is just something that you put on the back burner that's kind of secondary. So this I have as an animation is just a maid or someone who is cleaning up a bunch of dirt, and we're going to see some, I'll just play it for you. Let's start there. So here's some secondary motion with the hair. You might see some other examples in there as well, but realistically, we're just looking at the hair here. She gets covered in dust and particles. Some other secondary motion would be these particles that came off of the dust pile, dirt pile, whatever you want to call it. And they're just going to float down. You don't really notice it unless you watch it over and over again. So here we have our little person who is currently covered in junk, and she has one strand of hair that's loose. And that's a little fun thing because you're like, oh, what's up with that? And then her whole hair goes all frizzy. And that's just going to be some secondary motion that shows you before something actually happens. You're like, her hair's a little bit messed up, and then goes all over the place. So that's going to give you some different details that you might not normally put in your animation, but I think is super important for well thought out animations. Okay, so we're going to talk about a pendulum. And the reason we're talking about this, you might not see it very often in real life. Pendulums are maybe something that you would have in a grandfather clock that's going back and forth and back and forth. Or if you watch a kid on a swing, that's sort of like a pendulum going back and forth on a string. And this is going to show you a little bit about physics in animation. So normally in real life, obviously we have gravity. If you're making an animation, oh sure, my ball bounces because of gravity, but it's not really that big of a deal. But when it comes to other things, gravity is a big deal. So this pendulum is going to change the movement of whatever the weight at the bottom is, depending on what part of the swing that they are in. So right now I'm using a human. If you want to try this at home, you can easily just use a circle. It's going to have the same effect. I just am a little bit much. So I'm having my pendulum, my guy's at the bottom, but he's going to start swinging. So this is going to show you a little bit about something called easing in and easing out. So easing in is going to be as I'm getting ready for this movement, I'm actually going really, really fast. So that's why I have speed lines. Once again, you can make them look like whatever you want. And then the problem is, though, with a pendulum, as you get to the peak of your swing, gravity is going to pull you down. So this is some physics within your animation art class. So the pendulum is going to start having gravity effect on it, and that's going to give us our easing out motion. So that's going to stop that flow and slow it down. So I was going super fast where I was moving not only the person a lot, but also the speed lines on the person. But we get to slide 5, frame 5 here, 6 and 7. It's basically just staying in the same spot. And that's going to be our ease out, where we are having a lot of gravity affecting us and we're slowing down our momentum. And then we're going back and we're going to see the same thing. So pendulum, if you're going to make that your animation, I would highly suggest having it loop because it looks beautiful. So I'm going to show you mine, and we have it looping. I did not do it very well, so it's a little bit finicky, but we can see I went step by step with you, but overall we can see that it's getting slower at the tips, either on the left or the right side, and then in the middle it's going pretty fast. So once again, I can drop down our FPS so it's a little bit easier to see. I'm going to put it back to 9. So now you can see it. It's a little bit more frame by frame. It's going a little bit slower and it's a little bit more glitchy, I would say. But you can also actually see my human and see how it's slowing down on the left and right sides. So I would highly suggest, if you're going to do a pendulum, have it loop because it looks really cool. All right, so now we're going to talk about background. So this background is just a river and some bushes and a tree. So I've told you before about the layers. This is going to be really important when you have to do with backgrounds, because you really don't want to have to redraw your background every time you move your character. So by having separate layers, you're able to draw on your background, keep it in the back, and not have to redraw it. It's just going to stay there and stay stagnant. But for this, I don't actually have any animations. Well, actually, I think I do. Anyways, I'm going to show you a little bit about lighting. So this is kind of a just drawing person thing in general, but lighting is super important to make it look realistic. So if you're not really looking for a realistic background, feel free to skip ahead. But I'm just going to show you a few examples of how you can use layers to actually add on to your background. So your background could be multiple layers, honestly, just depending on the light. So I'm going to show you one instance. This is called lightning bugs. It's in my bottom left. You can see it as one of my layers. Once again, I'm going to click that little dot so that you can unhide your layer. So now it's unhidden. This one actually has an animation because I moved my lightning bugs, or fireflies, however you want to call it. And you can see they're here, 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 here. They're all over. I also put a transparent blue over it. So this is a layer that is on top of my background layer. And this transparency allowed me to make it look darker, like it's nighttime. So I'm just going to play this one really quick. This is just showing some lightning bugs going back and forth, buzzing a little bit. I think it looks really pretty. And this is just one example of how lighting can really change your background. So just some subtleties here. You can see that my lightning bugs, I used the yellow transparent brush, and I made it so that some of the lightning bugs are actually reflecting light off of nearby things. So the leaves on this bush over to the left, you can see that the light is reflecting off of those leaves so that the lightning bug isn't the only thing that's lit up. Okay, so now that was the lightning bug. Back to our normal background. Once again, I just used a transparent brush to make it look darker. So here's another one. This is some sunlight that looks to be filtering through some leaves. This one is not animated. It's just to show you some different things you can do with the transparency. Once again, I literally just took a transparent yellow paintbrush, or like pencil, whatever you want to use, and I just took a strip and took it all the way back up to the left corner, the top left corner. So that's going to give you rays of sunlight filtering through the leaves, and that's something else that can give you some new lighting to your old background. This is another one. This is actually animated. It's basically just rain. I use some white streaks to be rain, and then I have our transparent blue that I put over top. So here you can see I didn't fully do it, but it is raining. And then lastly, I have another sun, just another thing, very simple, putting some sunlight beaming through leaves to change up our background a little bit. And then you can see that my background is at the very bottom. And then I have sky as well. So I can make my sky go away. It was just easier to draw the sky that way instead of on my background. Colors and characters. So you might think of a stick figure, which is just black and white, usually black on top of a white background. But if you want to start making your characters, you might want to think about different things like colors and color schemes. So this is kind of bleeding into style. So style can really set apart two different people and their cartoon style with animation. And that's going to maybe change the complete tone of your cartoon. So SpongeBob, which is super smiley and happy, is a lot different from a Ghibli movie, which can be sad and depressing and that sort of thing. So we're going to talk about color and characters. This isn't super animation-y about actually drawing and stuff, but this is going to give you some inspiration, hopefully, for when you're making your own characters. So this is a background. I just want to give you the very basic color scheme. We got our mustard, we have the red and the gray. So that's going to give you a sunset, very simple, but actually choosing these interesting color schemes are going to really change your background from just saying, oh, I'll use forest green and sky blue to make my forest and my trees and my sky. This is going to give you something different, which will give you something really unique for your background. This is another background. This is from a Ghibli movie, Spirited Away. This might be Howl's Moving Castle, I'm not quite sure. I think it's Howl's Moving Castle. Anyways, so this, even though we are using our sky blue, we are using really bright colors to make it a very happy landscape. So that's where our pink comes in, and our whites, and our really, really neon green. So if you want a happy landscape, use happy colors, like really bright colors. And I would say there's not really much here that's dark, really at all. Like even the shadows underneath the islands and the little peninsula there, it's not really that dark. But if we move on, this is a more sunset and blurry photo. But we have our color scheme, which I really, really like. And even if you're not doing a sunset, if you pick these three colors and only stick to these three colors, either for a character that you're drawing or a background that you're making, honestly, it's going to turn out really good. Because surprisingly, when you choose your colors beforehand, it's going to end up making it feel planned, and it'll give you some constraints that will make a really interesting background. So here we're going into some characters. So this is from Ponyo, a Studio Ghibli film. And we have our two characters who have very different color schemes. And I don't know if you guys have watched cartoons, but usually the cartoons have the same clothes throughout the whole TV series or the whole movie. They never change their clothes. But that's to keep it a unique color scheme for that character. So I can tell these two characters apart, even though they're basically the same age and they kind of look the same, because of the color of their hair, their clothes, and really their personalities comes out even within these colors. So we have a lot of oranges or salmon color for Ponyo, and then the other character has more mustard green kind of look to it. Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. We're keeping with the blues and the purple, which go very well together. Once again, if you honestly just choose three colors and stick to them, you're going to end up making a really interesting colored character. So Stitch, like other than the pink mouth, is literally three colors, maybe four. And then we're looking at some different ambiance that you can get from your character. So if you're making an evil character, I don't know if this is something that's ingrained in our heads, but usually dark colors are seen as evil, especially green. I don't know why, but somebody with green eyes seems pretty evil. So we have our green smoke and our green eyes with Scar. This is from The Lion King, who is the evil villain. And he also has some dark black and gray tones. So that's going to give him a less good look. But then when you have our main character, you're going to have our bright colors. He's the hero, which is really contrasting with that evil character. So that's going to be the end of our characters, and hopefully that will give you some inspiration. And we'll talk more about inspiration later. Okay, so that's about it for what I have for 2D animation using Pencil2D. So this is some inspiration if you're really stumped on what you want to make when you're animating. These are just some YouTube links. I'll put them in the description. I obviously have not made any of these YouTube videos, but I think they're really good if you're in a pit and you're like, oh, I don't know, I like have no artistic creativity right now. I just feel really low. I can't figure out what I'm going to do. This is going to give you some different YouTube videos from 2D animation. Just going quickly through that. Crayon Dragon. This is a really cute animation. It's really good for character and color inspiration. Who Framed Roger Rabbit intro. It's just a similar to Wile E. Coyote and Bugs Bunny, that sort of thing, where it's showing you basically the limits of cartoony stuff. And that's where we're getting our squash and stretch again, which I talked about with the ball bounce. But this is with characters, and it is hilarious and really cute, funny. A tad violent, but you know, it's good. It's a really good animation for anyone who wants to look into the cartoon violence, which is like taking a huge Looney Tune hammer and squishing a mouse, right? That's going to really give you some of that cartoony feel there. Tarboy is a really good one if you're looking at different styles. So this is more cyberpunk, dark style, but it's really inspiring when it comes to how the story is told and how the characters actually look. So that could be something that you can delve into as well. If you're looking, once again, back to that cartoony style of just, I want to make a funny animation. Well, that's where Dad's Home comes in. So that's just a really fun cartoony animation that can show you some, oh, I want to make a funny animation about my dad who broke through the wall. That's basically what that's going to show you. And then Xiao Xiao 3 is a stick figure animation, and this is a fight with like swords and stuff like that. So if you're really into stick figure animation and you're like, I want to make a huge battle, like this is the perfect one. It has a few things that you might notice along the way of character shrinking because they're not using arcs well enough, but that's going to be a really good thing that you can look for information. And then a few weeks from now, I'm going to post another video for 3D animation using Blender. So hopefully you can look at that and decide, ooh, maybe I'm going to be a professional animator. I don't know. So thank you very much.